Today on Locked On Canadiens, are Canadiens fans exaggerating their concerns about Stephane Robidas? There's a new hockey team and a new hockey league in Montreal. Plus, with our special guest, we'll talk about the things we're most excited of what's to come, and that's on today's Locked On Canadiens.
For Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 667 of Locked On Canadiens, your first listen of every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. My name is Laura Sab. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Matla of Habs Eyes on the Prize. And today, as a special guest, we've brought on his boss. So, Scott, do you feel like you're in the hot seat right now?
No. Jared's been around me in person several times now to know what to expect for myself. And we launched the podcast over at Eyes on the Prize before I joined Locked On Canadian. So Jared knows exactly what he's getting. Only this is our show, so I get to decide what stays in the edits on a given night. So for better or for worse in that regard, it's usually for the worst because sometimes you have a little bit too much caffeine and you yell about Vegas and people get mad at you on Twitter. So, but we're not doing that tonight. We're not getting mad at Vegas on this show tonight, I promise.
And as you mentioned, our special guest today is Jared Book, Deputy Managing Editor of Habs Eyes on the Prize. Jared, fresh off a vacation, we have decided to poach you for it's very early in our off season of special guests. You're one of the very first we've invited on. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It's the vacation was very needed. It's been a busy couple of I guess a month. The month of July was pretty busy with everything going on. But yeah, it's been great and happy to be here and get my hockey brain turned back on a little bit. I mean, we have the World Juniors next week. Like it's just a weird like it's just weird summer. But
that took us by surprise too. It's like, oh, the World Juniors are next week. Wait, what? That is true. They're like, this summer is kind of unique in that it's still one of the ones that are a little bit shorter because of the NHL rescheduling, things like that. And there's so much going on, right? We talked about it last week. We're like, oh, the draft was this month, right? It seems like so much has gone on. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about and not miss was that there's a new hockey league in Montreal and there's a new hockey team in Montreal. And actually there is quite a, I would say a Canadian superstar on this team.
Yeah, I mean, the Montreal PHF team, I really hope they get a name soon because calling them the Montreal PHF team is long and annoying. But basically, yeah, I mean, the big news that happened actually while I was away, I got the alert on my phone, was that they signed their first 7 players. And one of them, and I'm assuming the person you're alluding to is Anne-Sophie.
Yes.
And that was... I somewhat of a surprise, not really a surprise. She's very close with Kevin Raphael, who is the team president and de facto GM, at least at this point. And I think that what that represents is really what this team is going to be. And what this team is going to be is very local, a lot of Quebec talent. And you're going to see players who might be second, third, fourth line players on a PWHPA team and get paid basically as stars in the PHF, which I mean is Sarah Lafleur is another one who signed, who was in that same kind of boat. She represented Canada U18s. She actually beat Marie-Philippe Poulin's records at Boston University, if you can believe that. And so it's just, that's really the leadership group for this team. Kim Deschênes is another longtime veteran who joined the team, and then they're joined with 4 first and second year pros. So that's really what this team is going to be going forward. And there's a lot of talent in Montreal, and I'm sure we'll get into that as we talk a little bit more about this team.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm really excited about because, every time we start talking about women's hockey, it always gets drowned out by the discourse. And something that I think people really just kind of need to remember is that this is really fun, exciting hockey with world class players, with talented players. And, I want to leave aside all the why should there be two leagues? Why can't they just get along and all of that? Because all that's all been done to death by people who know more than I do about it as well, right? For me, as a person, as a Montrealer, as a Montreal hockey fan, I just want to be able to go to games. I don't have any children, but I know a lot of people, including yourself, have kids. Like, you want to have your kids look up to players who are some of the best in the world, and particularly, I would say that, as you mentioned, Quebec has a lot of talent. Montreal has a lot of talent, and there's a lot of people that we can get excited about in our backyard. And I think, one thing that people just always forget is that these women have to fight so hard to kind of get not just ice time, not just recognition, not just respect, but also a place for them to play and get paid to play. And to me, this is something where it's likely going to be pretty easy for us to support, right? The schedule is going to be family friendly. It's going to be friendly for people. You can either it's usually on weekends, right? If it's anything like we expect the women's league to be, or the one that was around before, the Canadian Women's Hockey League. I think that, this is just something where if you want to see a couple of good players play, if you want to see some exciting hockey, I can't get enough of it. Every time I watch women's hockey, particularly in recent years, I've come to appreciate it a lot more. There's just so much talent, so much excitement. And I'm just so excited for Montreal to have this, right? I think that, to me, is the thing that we need to focus on. And when that other league does get created, founded, it's in the works, all of that, I don't think that we need to see it as two competing leagues. I think we need to see it as two opportunities to watch exciting hockey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's so much that you can say about this, but Montreal is what I consider the women's hockey capital of the world. It has the history, it has the current talent, it has everything that you would want from a city. They have three of basically the top 10 Canadian university teams in the country are in Montreal, and that doesn't even factor in University of Ottawa, Carleton, Bishops, who are also in the Quebec Conference. It has a bunch of talent that look. Montreal's CWHL team was a championship contender despite having like three national team players. Right, so you have three national team players at the time. It was Caroline Ouellette, Charlene Labonte, and it was even before Lorianne Rougeau was another one. And basically, I mean, they had Julie Chu as well, who's obviously American. But I mean, that they basically relied on that second tier. Anne-Sophie Bataille, for better or for worse, was part of that second tier for a long time. And when she finally got the call to Team Canada, it was probably 5 or 6 years too late. And you had the young players coming up and passing her on the depth chart. So people would be surprised at how good those players are because you don't know about them, right? You didn't know about Anne-Sophie Bataille 5-6 years ago, but you should have. You didn't know about Noémie Marin, but she finished as the CWHL's all-time leading goal scorer. These are the players that the PHF team will give opportunities to, and even players beyond that, especially because in recent years, Montreal has become a kind of destination for Canadian women's hockey players from outside Quebec, right? So you do have the Marie-Philippe Poulins, the Melody Daouz, Anne-Renée Desbiens, but you've also had Emerence Mashmeyer, Erin Ambrose, Emily Clark, Jamie Bourbonnais, Kristen O'Neill, Jesse Eldridge, a bunch of players from out of the province. And so this gives a chance for players coming out of McGill, Concordia, University of Montreal, a place to play after they graduate and get significant playing time. Not going to be behind all these national team players. And that's not to say that it's a second tier league, because I don't want to give that impression, but it's about developing that second generation so that they can become the Anne-Sophie Batailles going forward and get a national team look. And I think that that's what you're seeing. Hockey Canada released a 142 person roster for their summer camps, and there's a lot of PHF players who weren't getting looks before, who are now getting looks. And I think that that's an opportunity to be seen and play regularly. And it's a great thing for the province, because they'll get more girls to play and develop into potentially national team players. But even if they're not national team players, even if they're good pro players, that's still good. The Montreal Canadiens are filled with players who are not national team players, but we know their names. They're getting paid a lot of money, and they have an opportunity to show their stuff.
And yeah, so like to me, this is only a good thing, right? Like you have to cut out all that noise and just think about the hockey and the players in some respects, right? Like there's been so much that's been said, and for me, I'm just like I'm so excited to just go with my friends and watch these games and get to know some of these players a little bit more, and maybe by the time the next Olympics roll around, we will be so well versed in women's hockey, and it won't just be the people who cover it and the diehard fans. It'll just be everybody will know them because they'll be household names. And that's the hope. And I think this is the first step. But coming up next, we're going to talk about the first step to the rest of the Montreal Canadiens. We're going to talk about the recently drafted players and which ones Jared is most excited to watch. And then later on, we are also going to discuss Stephane Robidas, because I know some of the fans are still a little bit unsure about that. People are still stressing out about Robidas. So we're going to talk about that in just one moment. But first, betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They've got you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action that's happening right now. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the draft that just happened, since we brought it up earlier in this episode. And I wanted to first apologize to all our listeners for any audio issues that we're having. They're all on my end. They're all my fault, but I blame my computer. Just in case, if you're listening, there's any shuffling or anything, that is all on my end. None from our esteemed guest or my wonderful co-host. But let's get back to talking about the Habs and the players they just drafted. I think, Jared, you were at the Bell Center along with Scott when let's start with the surprise first overall pick. Were you shocked at all?
No, I'm not shocked. Not shocked. I mean, it's hard to say that you were shocked when news came out. I think 15 minutes before the pick was announced, maybe even 20. And listen, if you were surprised, you weren't paying attention, right? I think that there was still a chance that it could have been Shane Wright. Even maybe even Logan Cooley. Look, and none of the picks would have surprised me unless they picked Matthew Savoy or something like that. That would have surprised me, but nothing else would have really surprised me. So surprised, no, but I was intrigued by it, and the more that I've gotten to see Juraj Slafkovsky interact and talk to people, and I talked to him after the draft, it's hard to not like him. I was okay with the pick when it happened. I was very okay with it when they traded for Kirby Dach. And once I heard Juraj Slafkovsky talk a little bit more, I was fully on board with it. And look, it might work out, it might not work out, but I do not have any problems with the pick at this point.
Yeah, I think, that's one of the things, is that we decided that we were going to stop litigating it fairly early on. But I do think that it's worth kind of talking about, because I'm getting more and more excited. It's very much like you said, right? Like the more information that you get, or the more you learn about him, the more you hear about him. And I have to say, it's definitely endearing. I think he is definitely somebody who I understand why the Canadians like him so much, right? And they seem to be, their decisions as of late, with the Chris Weidman re-signing and all of that, they seem to be like, they fall in love with a personality. Sometimes it does feel like that. But it's not to say that he doesn't have the talent. And we've had people, scouting experts and stuff like that talk to us about what his development should be like or will be like. and his potential. But I also want to talk a little bit, because we've kind of been doing a little bit. We did a deep dive on Lane Hudson, and then we talked a little bit about the OHL prospects on our last episode. Which player that the Canadiens acquired this season are you most excited to watch develop, whether or not he makes the NHL? Like, whose journey are you most excited to watch?
I think it'd be easy to say any of the top, 4 or so picks. So I won't go there. I know you just had Lauren on talk about Owen Beck. He was one of my favorites early on as well. Lane Hudson is just going to be super intriguing to watch as well. I'm going to go a little bit off the board. I'm going to say Vincent Rohrer. The good thing about being at the draft is you get to see and interact with these kids, right? They're kids. So, but when I heard Rohrer talk, and the way that he was articulating himself and talking about himself as a player, just 100% on board. Like, that's just a good kid, like a great kid. And I've probably heard him talk more than I've seen him play hockey at this point. But I'm fully on board with him. I don't think he's going to become like a superstar or anything like that. But you mentioned the personality thing. That's the one thing that struck me, is that the Canadiens are building good character people. Like, you talk to any of the kids that the Canadiens drafted this past year, and they're all like super engaging, super friendly. All of their teammates say really good things about them. Like, that's just, it's a type, right? It's not a coincidence. I think it's too easy to say it's a coincidence. I think it's definitely a type of player that they're looking for. And Nick Bobrov said after the draft that about a bunch of players, that they're people that people follow. He said it about Slavkovsky. He said it about Owen Beck, I think, as well. They're people that can be leaders on the team, and I think that character was thrown around a lot by the former regime of this team, and sometimes it became a running joke. But I do think that there's something to be said for it, and this Canadiens draft really shows the importance of that. And was it a factor of just being able to sit in a room with these players during the process that they haven't had in 2 or 3 years, potentially? But yeah, I was very intrigued by a lot of the picks that they had. But I'm going to go with Rohrer because I want to see how he develops going into his second OHL season and going forward. And it's the other guys are all really good too, right? Like, I can say any of them, but I want to be a little bit more unpredictable, I'd say.
I would absolutely agree with the fact that he seems like such a fun personality, right? And I think when we talk about the word character, when we talk about the old front office as well, like we talk a lot on this podcast about an era of hockey that has come to an end, right? There are some people that are still in denial, and they think we're still in that era of hockey where character means that you're going to play injured. Character means that you're going to punch faces. And while I do believe that there is a time and a place for punching faces, or when somebody goes near your goalie and all of that kind of stuff, like, I do believe in that stuff, but I do think that character in this front office means personalities that will work together, right? Like, they will value being in a team, and they talk so much about the leadership aspect of it, right? But it's not personalities in such a way that they would necessarily clash or and it feels to me that the one thing they took away from the Canadian Stanley Cup final run last year was the power of doing it for your teammates. You put a bunch of people together, but that, like, all of this to say, like, we talked so much about their personalities, all of this to say that does not in any way mean that these kids don't have talent or potential, right? Like, they did also make on ice hockey decisions. It's just that they fell in love with these players, and to their credit, right? Like, we as fans have been really excited about these players since we heard their names. So I do think that there's a lot to be said for that. And at the same time, like, if you look at the on ice sort of decision, like, yeah, they didn't go big unless you count Slavkovsky, like, he counts for more than one person's size. But they didn't necessarily go big, right? They wanted people who could skate because they have learned that it doesn't matter what somebody does with their hands or their brain. If they can't skate, they're not going to be able to keep up with the Stanley Cup winners of tomorrow, right? all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of focus on skating. There's a lot of focus on decision making, reads, hockey sense, which also kind of, we kind of could tell that that's the direction they're going in when they chose Martin St. Louis. And we're going to talk in a second about some of the other personnel decisions that they've made. But Scott, I have monopolized the conversation. Did you want to ask anything, or are you just trying to be? Are you trying to be inoffensive right now?
I just wanted to also mention, their last pick in the draft, Miguel Torini, that undersized high offense defenseman that they picked from the QMJHL there. They've had a lot of success with those 7th round pick going back several years. You have Jake Evans, you have Raphael Harvey-Pinard, you have Caden Primo, you now have whose name I'm forgetting. They literally just signed him to the Rocket on an AHL deal. That's the one, Xavier Simino. And now they have this other overager who can join the AHL this year on an AHL deal. They don't have to sign into an entry-level deal there. And I'm kind of excited to see how that goes, because I don't think I've seen a team generate, players in the 7th round quite like this. They can't hit on anything in the 1st round, but the further away from that they apparently get better at it. So take that for what you will. I'm excited to see what he does. I don't think he's going back to the Q. I think he'll either be in the ECHL, or they'll give him a shot with the Rocket as well. I expect he'll feature heavily at the rookie tournament here in Buffalo next month in September. Even if it's not on the first, pairing, I imagine he's going to get a hefty dose of power play time out there. So I'm excited to see kind of what he can do here, and see if their 7th round magic continues to work its way forward.
I absolutely agree there. We do agree a lot on this podcast, but that's not why we're here right now. Right now we're here. I think we're kind of, I want to say I was on the record about being hesitant about the Stephane Robidas pick or hire, and we're going to talk about that in just one moment. All right, let's talk about this, because we did the episode. It was a Friday mailbag episode about right after the Canadiens announced that they'd hired Stephane Robidas as one of their assistant coaches to help develop their young players. They said the word development. They said develop a lot, right? Obviously, he has player development experience, but he doesn't have that much experience behind the bench. And so a lot of people were concerned, not because of the person they chose, but the fact that all of their coaching staff right now seems young or inexperienced, right? And I personally, like I said, I'm hesitant because I want to see how it goes, right? And the way that I sort of decided that I would make my decision or choose, sort of determine my opinion on this was, if the Canadiens defensive system comes out in the first 10 games and it still sucks, that's fine, right? 30, 40 games in, I want to see some improvement. At the end of the season, I want to see a system. I want to see some defense. I want to see them play not like they just met 5 minutes ago. And if I can see that in like game 70, then I'm going to feel better about this. But I'm going to be hesitant, not because I think that he's in any way, a bad coach or a bad choice. I just worry that, as a whole, this is a very inexperienced staff. So Jared, I know you had some thoughts on this that kind of made me feel better, and you expressed them on Twitter, but would you like to express to our listeners how you feel about this decision?
Yeah, first of all, I'm surprised you're not giving him 300 games like they gave you Luke Richardson. But no, I love Luke. That's a little harsher than I want it to be. But no, I mean, look, this team, you mentioned it a lot of times, this team is mentioning development a lot. I've never seen an NHL coaching staff mention development more than Martin St. Louis, Kent Hughes, and, so many people. I mean, look, they have like 4 development coaches. The Canadiens have not had 4 development coaches ever. Or I think, like, if you add all the development coaches they've ever had, you get 4 development coaches. Like, it's refreshing, right? Like, well, you mentioned going into the 21st century when it came to character and players. This is the 21st century. Like, this is what you have to do. You have to develop players. You don't just throw them in the fire and see what happens. And the Canadiens are in a unique position where they're allowing their coaches to develop as well, right? Because no one's going to judge Stephane Robidas on the first 50 games of the season. This team is not expecting to be very good. It hasn't been very good. And if it's not very good, that's fine. They're looking like they're going to enter the season with, 4 rookies or young players on defense. But something that really intrigues me about this entire coaching staff, and it's actually something that I've thought about a while, ever since Chris Weidman re-signed, and he mentioned that how Martin St. Louis is teaching him things. And that really stuck out with me. And I've meant to write an article about this for a few months now, but I haven't. But maybe I will now. But basically, they're focusing on teaching, right? That's Martin St. Louis. What does he always say he was best at? Getting better. He understands that as a teachable tool. Stephane Robidas, player development background. Trevor Letowski, player development background. Alex Burrows went from ball hockey Hall of Famer to NHL player. All these coaching staff hires have development either personally in their professional life or in their coaching life. And I think that that's intriguing. You look at Maggie Duplantis, brought on as development. Adam Nicholas, they're teaching players how to be better, how to get better. And I think that that's probably the most intriguing thing about this entire philosophy is that for some people, you see a rookie GM, a rookie head coach, basically 3 rookie assistant coaches, and you're like, uh-oh. But at the same time, you're focusing on the people, right? And Trevor Letowski has experience with Team Canada in the OHL. Alex Burrows had experience with the Rocket before being promoted to the Canadiens. Martin St. Louis, I mean, coaching experience, no, but probably one of the smartest players to ever play in the NHL. Stephane Robidas, a lot of people would say the same thing. And you mentioned size and things like that before. Look, undersized Martin St. Louis, undersized Stephane Robidas. He played in an era where you just didn't see defensemen his size in the NHL. And he made a really long career out of it. You look at a guy like Lane Hudson or like Scott mentioned, Miguel Torini. That's a pretty good guy to teach them how to deal with NHL players. So I do think that there's going to be a focus on development, and that goes with the coaching staff as well. That goes with the executive as well. I mean, so much as there's been a lot of criticism about Jeff Gorton's history, right, and his drafting record with the Rangers and development record with the Rangers. But if we're expecting players to develop and coaches to develop, why not executives, right? Jeff Gorton can learn from his mistakes. He can adjust from them. And same thing goes with Nick Bobrov and even Martin Lapointe and all those players, all those people. So Trevor Timmins made a career out of changing his philosophies, for better or for worse. He was there for 20 years, and he wasn't the same person he was on day one. So I definitely think that there's a very intriguing philosophy with the Canadiens, and it might not work. There's a chance it might not work, but I definitely like their chances of it working, and it's not going to be a short-term thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's times when we're like, what is this team doing on the ice? But I mean, at the same time,
like on the penalty kill, for example.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that, could it be any worse, really?
Don't you dare put that out into the world. Can it be worse? It can always be worse. This is hockey and sports we're talking about. How bad could it get? Oh, Aaron Rodgers eats horse paste. Oh, Dominique Ducharme doesn't know what he's doing. It can always get worse when you love sports too much. It can always get worse.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, look, I mean, I don't know whether it was Luke Richardson being kind of Ducharmed in that he didn't know what to change, or I don't think it's his communication, right? Because players loved his communication. So for me, it's hard to get a read on why it looks so bad. I mean, Luke Richardson worked for basically 3 different head coaches, and nothing really changed. And I'm not putting that all on him. I don't think it's all on him. But the personnel obviously was an issue as well. But just at a certain point, change is good. And would it be better? Would I be more comfortable with more experience, say a Guy Boucher or a Jacques Martin on the bench? Possibly, but at the same time, coaches that are fired were fired for a reason, right? Like I just, I feel that this is a player development hire for a team that's focused on player development, so it makes sense. And look, if you're already going all in with Martin St. Louis, which this team is, why not focus on that and let them all learn together, right? Like I just think that there's something to be said for them coming together as a group and learning together and growing together. So you have a young team with players and prospects growing together. You have a young coaching staff learning and growing together. I think that could be a recipe for success.
I also think that there's one thing that we haven't talked about a lot in sort of whether or not this is going to work or not, is that the Canadians kind of have the luxury of time. Because if you're going to do this, if any team wanted to do this, there was never a better situation than now, right? There could be so many GMs or front office staffs or executives or presidents or owners even that would have wanted to do this. Be like, let's get a bunch of rookies in there and let's mold them to what we want, right? And see what happens. And you have a very short window of time to do that. You have to do it coming off of something that is like a season, for example, that's so disappointing that people are like, anything is better than this. And you have to do it with the promise that you're not always going to get it right, but you're going to try because you feel that the way that you think. Like, I'm just thinking about this, and like they are in a unique situation because they not only lucked into this. We have to say they did luck into this, right? But they also now have the luxury of time, because if it doesn't work in year 1, 2, 3, I think it'll be year 5 before people start pulling out the torches and pitchforks, right? So if some things don't work out, but you can see a market improvement by year 2, 3, then I think, they'll get a little bit more leeway from fans. But I think for me, the luxury of time is something that we haven't talked all that much about. Like, we talk about, oh, they're expected to be bad that next year, so it doesn't really matter. But no, you can kind of also look at it in a different way, where they have the time to throw things at the wall, see what sticks, and then narrow it down. And I think that that's something that's really exciting to me. And just the idea where, like, I feel like people would dream of having this, where they can just start from scratch and just go all new, all new, all new, and just pick people that maybe they had a good feeling about, but because they didn't have the experience or they weren't a retread. And it just, and that's never to say that old coaches can't learn new tricks or anything like that. Some people do come back having learned and having grown, but just this idea of new, and it's not just new for the sake of newness. It's thought out choices, essentially. It's a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's the key thing here, is that there's a plan. There's a vision. It might not work, but it's cohesive, right? Like it all makes sense. It's not like you're, getting Slavkovsky and then trading Anderson and then trading for a center and then getting another center. And then, like if there was another GM in charge, would the Canadians have Shane Wright and Pierre-Luc Dubois right now? Probably.
Mhm.
Right. Like I just think that there's something to be said for, like you said, a plan. And look, they don't have unlimited time, right? Nick Suzuki's starting year 1 of a really big contract. Do you really want to waste 3 or 4 years of that? Probably not. So, you have Cole Caulfield coming up for a contract renewal very soon. Kirby Dach is probably going to get bridged and then have another contract coming up. So there's a transition period, but I don't think that the way things are going, I don't see it being very long if it works, right? Like I think by year 3, you're going to know whether it's working or not, right? You're going to know whether.
You're going to know
Yeah.
by year 2 as well, right? Like, you're
Right.
going to see the differences on the ice. You might not have all the better players, or you might not have a higher position in the rankings or make the playoffs or whatever, but you're going to see if you see changes in the way players carry themselves and the way they play and the decisions they make, right?
Yeah, exactly. And look, they're entering year 2 now. That's year 2 of the Letowski contract, year 2 of the Burrows contract. It's a lot easier to make changes like that going into, as opposed to firing 3 guys who just got 3-year contracts. Like Luke Richardson, they kind of, I don't want to say lucked out, because I think they would have been happy with him staying. But at the same time, you allow yourself to get new perspectives because he gets hired elsewhere. So I think that it was an interesting situation to come into. I don't know if every GM would have been as gung ho on the future. I think that maybe other GMs, there'd still be a Tyler Toffoli in the fold, maybe even Arturi Lehkonen in the fold. So I do think that there's a very focused perspective. But what's interesting to me is that everything, like, you can call it kind of like this, like, country club mentality where everyone's hiring their friends and there's all these connections. But at the same time, they just hired the scout that drafted Emil Heineman. And, like, it's just like, if you really believe in these players and these people, why not go all in with them, right? Like, Kent Hughes knows Martin St. Louis. Jeff Gorton knows Martin St. Louis. If they agree on philosophy, why not go all in on that? Why do you have to have, different backgrounds for the sake of different backgrounds, right? If you agree with Nick Bobrov, why do you have to hire someone who you haven't worked with before? So I do think that there's something, like I said, to be said for kind of developing together, and that goes for a scouting staff, an executive staff, and a coaching staff as well. I think that there's really, look, it might not work. It might be all like, this is a crazy idea, and in some ways it kind of is. But I'd rather crazy ideas than let's hope that Michel Therrien or Alain Vigneault can learn how to win again.
When they have shown that they
Right,
can
like,
only get so far.
right, like,
And
would people really be happier if Alain Vigneault was the head coach of Montreal Canadiens right now?
Don't
Probably
put that
not,
out there
right?
in the
Like,
world.
at least,
Don't put that in the world. Do not put that in the world. People got mad at us when we joked about that at Eyes on the Prize. Don't put it out there. Don't you do that. I don't want to wish that evil
look,
on anybody.
if I had the power to talk things into existence, I would not be in the situation I'm in right now. I mean, I'd be on your podcast, but I wouldn't be, in the whole scheme of things, anyway, that's all.
And so we didn't even get time to talk about what we think the Canadians need to add, but somebody asked that as a mailbag question, actually, for our next episode. I want to thank Jared very, very much. You can find Jared on Twitter at Jared Book, literally just his name, right? No underscores or anything, as well as at Habs Eyes on the Prize, where he is Scott's boss. You can find Scott at Habs on the Prize, as well as at Scott Matlaw on Twitter. You'll find me at The Active Stick. The podcast is at LO_Canadians. Please email us questions for the mailbag at lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Jared, for being here. We are so excited to have like off-season time to finally just let's invite people we like on and talk to them, essentially. So we really, really appreciate your time. As for the rest of you, once you're done listening to this, check out Locked On NHL. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you on Friday with our mailbag.